All right, so we're
Right.
going to start off swinging. So you, my friend, have had a incredible, remarkable music career spanning multiple decades, multiple bands. I mean, Buffalo Springfield, Poco, Loggins and Messina, and now your own solo career. Where did it all start for you? What was that one moment, like, maybe you were a kid, maybe something happened, maybe there was like that one catalyst that kind of catapulted you into like, okay, music is for me.
Well, I had been living. I was in junior high school. I had been living in Hermosa Beach, Redondo Beach area, Manhattan Beach, and I was just now starting to pick up the guitar and listen to music and starting to think like, man, I'd like to do this. And then my parents decide to move to the Inland Empire, which was out in Riverside, San Bernardino, Colton area. And suddenly I was being asked, as I'm just going into high school, to leave the beautiful California sunny beaches, blonde girls, on the beach, sand, volleyball group of people, and move to a place where it was future farmers of America.
Quite the
And I
difference.
just, I just thought I was going to die. I was so unhappy, and my grandmother lived a block away from us. We lived kind of in the country. We lived orange groves were on one side and just a highway on the other. And my grandmother and grandfather were into music. They were into vaudeville and all that when they were young
Sure.
folks. And so I was visiting my grandma. And I told her I want to go live with my dad. I don't like living out here. And she said, well, what? She said, I was just starting to learn to do music, and there's nobody here. I live in an orange grove, and she said, well, there's a little boy up the street. His name is David, and I think he plays music. I think he's a saxophone player or something. Maybe get together with him. Now, this is my first year before I enter high school, so I'm 13 years old,
Mm.
and so I went to visit David, and David was a sax player, and he says, yeah, I'd like to do some music, and I know some folks. Maybe we. So the next thing I know, we put together a little band, and we're rehearsing in his house, and it was pretty good. We had a piano player and me on guitar and David on sax, and we didn't have a bass player yet. I think we had another guitar player. And so I was getting excited. We were learning music like Walk Don't Run, Perfidia,
Oh, yeah.
and songs from the Torquays and some surf music. And
All those early 60s instrumentals, right?
yeah, exactly. And so the champs, du- 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 du-
Sure.
du, uh, and I don't know if you know this, but the champs originally, that was Seals and Crofts. Both of those guys were in that band.
I did not know
Um,
that. Wow.
yeah, yeah, they were. In fact, um, Jimmy Seals was the sax player, and he's the one that played that solo. It's just so good.
Yeah.
And anyway, moving on, I managed to. We played some music, and we needed to get a gig, so I called the the country club that was in that area, Grand Terrace Country Club, and asked them if they could use some musicians. And of course, I'm 13 years old. Would you like to have some musicians? We're really good players. And I'm sure the guy said, "Who in the hell is this kid?" So anyway, I said, if you want us to play, here's our phone number. So about 2 weeks later, my mother gets a call, and she said, I got a call from somebody that said you called them up the Grand Terrace about a job playing music. Did you do that? And I said, yeah. She says, well, apparently they'd like you to maybe come play on the weekends. I said, great.
Wow.
So we go up there and we meet with them, and it turns out that what they really need are some babysitters. And most of the people that belong to the country club are Air Force folks. So
Wow.
their kids were Air Force brats, and pilots like sea captains, that they need a little bit of alcohol to balance them out, so that on the weekends they can walk a straight line. So this was a good way to get rid of the kids. They put them down to the pool house, put us in there playing music. So over the summer, during the week, we played music for all the kids that were our age, while their parents got loaded up in the up in the dining rooms. Uh, So that was my first really experience into getting into music. And then, of course, when I entered high school, the musicians would evolve, and I found new players, and we began doing a little more sophisticated Dick Dale and, just uh, bands like the Beach Boys and things like that, Chuck Berry, uh, from what I recall, and played CYO dances and high school dances, and sometimes the Kaiser Dome or the in San Bernardino had the San Bernardino Auditorium. So I was getting my education as a performing musician back between 13 and 17. But it wasn't until I turned about 16 that a guy by the name of Glenn Edwards,
Hmm.
who was a DJ working at the Disneyland Hotel in Anaheim, somehow discovered me and contacted me and asked me if I would produce for him at his record label. And I had no idea what he was talking about. And I said,
Okay.
but what do you mean produce? And he says, well, I just want you to come in and listen to the music and, make everything sound the way you want it to sound, that the musicians are playing the right chords and all of that stuff. And I thought to myself, well, hell, that's what I'm due here anyway. So I said, yeah, I'll take the job. So on the weekends in my senior year, I would drive to Hollywood and work at this place called um, Emperor Productions.
Hmm.
It was a studio owned by Bob Hudson, who at the time was a famous DJ working for KRLA, who later went on and formed a comedy team called Hudson and Lambert,
Hmm.
and were very successful. But he had an engineer that worked for him by the name of Mike DeRoe, and Mike DeRoe was the engineer that was assigned to me as I was working as a producer to make these records. So after about a year, his label went under, and I had graduated from high school. I went back out to Hollywood, and I told Mike that I would like to stay in touch with him. And I tried to become a musician, but everybody was so good. You had Tommy Tedesco and Glenn Campbell, James Burton, and Keith Allison. All the good guitar players they're busy, and I just was too young to keep up with them.
Yeah.
So I decided to ask Mike if I could apprentice under him as a recording engineer. So I began my apprenticeship with him, and you start off first by sleeping on the floor and sweeping the floors, and then learning how to edit and align machines. And he taught me how to uh, you know wire patch bays and the difference between balanced and unbalanced. And before I know it, I'm doing minor maintenance and learning how to mix. And eventually, through his guidance, he got me jobs working at Harmony Recorders, Audio Arts, and eventually um, at Sunset Sound Recorders, which is where my professional career really began, not only as an engineer, but as in working with the Buffalo Springfield eventually. While Mike and I would produce things, and we'd had a hit with a group called the Deep Six, called The Rising Sun, and I had tried to work for some other labels, but we were constantly producing something, whatever we could do to get a job. But once I started working at Sunset Sound Recorders, that took up all my time.
Hmm.
Um, so when I started working there, I did a lot of different acts, from Lee Michaels to a lot of different acts that were on A&M Records. But eventually, the Buffalo Springfield came in, and I did their uh, second album, which was called Buffalo Springfield Again. And that was what put me in touch with them as people through my engineering abilities, and eventually was asked to produce the band by Alma Durdigan and the band. And then
Wow.
when they lost their bass player Bruce Palmer, they didn't realize it. They didn't even know I was a musician. But through my relationship with Joe Osborne and James Burton, Mike and I had built a studio for Joe. He couldn't afford to pay me and Mike, so I agreed if he was willing to help me out on getting around on the bass guitar and learning more about it and how to play it and sounds and stuff, that I would do it for free, and he did. So by the time that position became open, they were auditioning bass players, and I raised my hand and I said, I'd like to audition. And they said, you play bass? I said, I think so. I think I can do
I
the
can
job.
find some notes, right?
Yeah, I can find most of those notes. There's only three or four of them anyway. Um, so they said, okay, well, yeah, you can audition. So there was 13 people auditioning for the job. I was one of them, and I was the last. And when I got up there and started playing with him, Stephen looked back at me, and he knew immediately I was the right guy because I knew all the songs and the way they were played. And why shouldn't I? I've been listening to them for a year and a half,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So so it was serendipitous, and both me being prepared when opportunity knocked to be able to get that job.
How different was production back in those days? I mean, you're dealing with tape, you're splitting tape, you're using reel-to-reel machines. How is the evolution of music production? I mean, you've seen every single bit of it. So how has it kind of evolved in the years that you've been in it?
Well, I don't have a favorite, but I can give you an observation. I do believe when there was less time, there was analog,
Mm,
and things needed to be done a lot quicker. You'd do three songs in 3 hours. Uh, People would come in with charts written, prepared. Um, and the reason why the people like Joe Osborne and Hal Blaine and Earl Palmer and all those folks got hired is because they could read music.
yeah.
And an arranger would come in because you're not rehearsing. You're basically saying, here's the tempo, da, 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 and here's the groove. And here's the artist, and he's singing. You got to be able to back that up, hear it, and know where to go with it immediately, if not sooner. And so music was recorded quicker with the better arrangements. You had great songs. I mean, when you look at some of the hits that were made with the Beach Boys and um, uh, I mean, I worked for Bob Ross, who was a major copyist on Sunset and Vine, doing his mastering work and demoing the what they called making demos with a lathe, where you make the lacquer lathe. You actually cut the record
Yeah.
on a lathe. I was working there, and he was the major copyist, so he was just busier than a dog with two noses, trying to keep up with the charts that needed to be written. So music had a different, on that professional level, had a different level. It went, it came. People knew what they were doing. Pretty similar to what's happening today in Nashville.
Mm,
They just have a different numbering system, but usually you've got your first call players are coming in. They know what they're going to play, what it's going to sound like. In Nashville, it's a little bit more of the same because they've got a genre, country music. Whereas in Hollywood, it wasn't just rock music or you know pop music or folk music. It was a lot of different genre. From when you look at um, Paul Simon and Garfunkel, for instance, as different from a different act that might be happening. You had different music, different artists. So these musicians had to be able to move from one genre to another or create a new one in the process, whether it's the Beach Boys and Simon and Garfunkel are two different acts, but you had the same musicians
yeah.
playing on the dates.
I mean, Hal
Um,
Blaine alone, he played on how many records, that guy? I mean, he's a legend, Hal Blaine.
yeah, more than there are flies on in a summer festival.
It's true though. I mean, the guy
Yeah.
has played on. You listen to a track from that era, you're like, well, Hal Blaine probably played on this.
Well, and I have to tell you, I was able to see these sessions, watch these sessions, and he was an exciting drummer to watch. I
Yeah.
mean, he just said, here we go, one, two, and he just count them off, and you better be ready or you miss the boat.
Hmm.
And the same with Earl Palmer. Earl Palmer was the same kind of player. They would just, it's unbelievable. It's like watching a professional tennis player play as opposed to an amateur,
Yeah.
and watching a professional drummer like that play as opposed to an amateur. You really really see why, and the feel, the timing, the each one of them could play the same shuffle, same beats per minute, but it does feel different. It's just the where they put the spaces that makes the difference. And
Different accents, ghost notes. I mean, it really makes it
yeah,
unique, drummer to drummer. So
yeah. But as an engineer, you needed to capture that. Whether when I first started, it was only 3 track. That was the biggest machine. Was a 3 track.
Wow.
Mono was the best. Was what was used a lot up until a certain time, and then the stereo came in. That was a big deal. But 3 track was even really bigger. And a year later, then they had the 4 track machines, which now started. You could use them from, and then 8 track came in, and then 16 track, and then from there, the 24 tracks went in, and it was all in an evolution time from around 1960. I want to say 1966, when I first started. Well, it was even earlier than that, 65, because I think by 1966, when I was working with the Buffalo Springfield, we were working with 8 track at that point.
Wow.
So it within 2 years, it really, really changed. Um, and in those days, you edited with a razor blade,
Yeah.
whereas in Pro Tools, you find a little place, you mark it, you blow it up, make sure you're in the right spot. You're looking at the waveform, you cut. In those days, you had to listen for the waveform. You had to make sure, and you had to cut it at a 45-degree angle, if not more, to keep it from having a blip when it went by.
Really? So it wasn't just a straight cut right down the middle. You kind of had to be a little precise with it.
It was a 45-degree cut with the lower edge going into the playback head first.
Wow.
So like a triangle, you'd see the bottom of the triangle, and then it would go over the record head so that it would allow it to just uh, slide through rather than just, well, I don't know if you've worked in Pro Tools, but when you
Yeah.
do fade or a fade out, fade in, how they have the fades, they have a 45-degree fade. Well, that mimics what a razor cut was on the
No
tape.
way. No way.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
That is super, super cool. I mean, the more you know. I mean, listen, you've been doing this for quite a bit. So I mean, you're the guy to ask as far as anything music
Well,
production goes.
it's just history. I'm just
Yeah,
giving you what's there.
that is super, super cool. All right, let's move on now. Let's talk about you and Kenny Loggins. So tell me how that kind of came to fruition. Just tell me your story about how you guys got so big and all that stuff.
Well, I first was made aware of Kenny Loggins, believe it or not, when I was working at a studio called Audio Arts that was owned by Madeline Baker. She was Jimmy Webb's publisher, and Jimmy Webb and I went to high school together. And I was working at that. I was just about ready to get a job there. I was interviewing when I walked in, and Mike Durow, who was the engineer, was working with a group of musicians. Musicians that I had worked with, Dan Lodemoser and Tony McCashin and Mac on drums. They were in a group called the Deep Six, which Mike and I had produced and got a local hit on them. But I went there to audition for a job because Mike wanted to leave. And as I was there, I was noticing that these musicians that I had worked with, that we had worked with, he and I, but there was this tall, skinny guy with a beard that I said, who's that? He goes, oh, his name is Kenny Loggins. I said, oh, he sounds pretty nice. He says, yeah, he's a good singer. And so anyway, that's when I first met Kenny, and I didn't really meet him. I just saw him out in the room. And then later in life, as I'm finishing up Poco, I get a call from a guy named Don Ellis, who was working at Columbia Records in artist development. Said, hey, I have a friend that I worked with at Tower Records. His name is Dan Loggins, and he has a little brother named Kenny. And we kind of think he might be very talented, and we'd like to try to sign him to Columbia Records. Would you be interested in producing it? He said, we have tapes. I said, well, I'm finishing up Poco right now. It was July. I said, I just really can't listen or take on to anything until I really finish up. So I get a call from Kenny around December, and he says, my name's Kenny Loggins, and Dan said, you might like to hear some of my tunes. And I said, yeah. I said, well, come on by. I was expecting him to bring his tape like they told me they had, and he shows up, and I look at him, and here's this tall, skinny guy with a beard and braces on his teeth, a part in his hair, and wear a blue shirt and a pair of Levi's like he had a load in his britches. And I thought to myself, wow, this is Okay. So, we sit down, we start talking. He's very personable and, he's a nice person. And I say, hey, so let's listen to your tapes. He said, well, I don't own any tapes. I said, really? Don said you had some tapes. Oh, I don't have any. I said, well, then why don't you just pull your guitar out? Well, I don't own a guitar. And at that point, I was thinking that my wife, who was an actress, and we were, she was in the movie business. All those folks were always pulling pranks on each other, and I thought I was getting a prank pulled on me.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm looking around for cameras to see if this is your life, and so I said, well, I'll tell you what, I have a recorder here. The Sony was set up there in the room, which I was using to work on. I have a couple of acoustics. Which one would you want? A nylon string or? Oh, I'll take the nylon. So he sat down and pressed record. I said, you know what to do? Point your mouth at the microphone. And so we sang, he sang, I should say, Danny's song. He sang House at Pooh Corner. I think Vahivla was part of that session. My Love's Gonna Tumble on You, which we never wrote, we never recorded. A couple of other songs, Santa Rosa. Uh, he sang them. We played. We had dinner. We made a taco dinner for him. He chatted, and I thought he was very personable, and he left. And my wife said, so what do you think? I said, I don't know what to think because most of these songs are folk songs. I said, we're past Peter, Paul, and Mary and
Yeah.
the Kingston Trio. And man, these are Dave Mason, Leon Russell days. And I said, I don't know what to think. And I had already signed the contract. I'd already been paid 8 months prior. And I'd turned down several artists. I turned down Andy Williams because I didn't think I would be the right person for him. He needed an older producer. Um, I turned down Dan Fogelberg
Wow.
because Dan Fogelberg, when he came to me, he said, I would like to work with you. And I said, well, listen, why would you like to work with me? Because I need to make sure I can meet your expectations. He said, well, that's simple. I want to make a Poco record. And I said, Dan, we got a problem here. I said, I just finished 3 years with Poco. We were too rock for country and too country for rock. And I said, I could barely feed my family from what I earned off of that. And I said, if you want to make a Poco record, you're going to have to go someplace else.
Yeah.
So I turned down Dan, who was a really, really good singer. Again, a little folkier than I would have wanted to do. But so I called Kenny back after a while, a few days, and we started working together. And I said to him, so how do you make a living? He says, well, I write songs. And I said, well, if you don't own a guitar, well, I got an old guitar. And he says, I said, well, what kind of songs do you write other than what this? He said, well, I can write anything. And I said, like what? He says, well, when the publisher wants to have a song like, sounds like Leon Russell, I can sing like Leon Russell. He starts singing like Leon Russell. I can write Leon Russell song. Or if they need an Elton John song, I can sing like Elton John. I start singing like Elton John. But, oh my God, this is, this is incredible.
Yeah.
Um, but what really intrigued me was that because Poco was having such a difficult time selling music because they were too rock for country and too country for rock, I thought with Kenny, having somebody who was interested in other styles of music by finding the right songs that were diverse and having him, you know, sing in those songs, that we might have a greater opportunity for his success. So that's kind of what got me into wanting to work with him. I didn't realize how inexperienced he was in terms of having a band or a manager, an agent. He had no businessman. He had none of that stuff.
Yeah.
And so in order to get that record to work, in my opinion, I suggested that I work with him and sit in with him on that first album, introduce him to my Poco audience, my Buffalo Springfield audience, go with him for the first tour, get him started, get him a road manager, make sure there was an agent and a manager in place so that when I left, he would have a greater uh, chance of success. And I didn't count on the fact that Loggins and Messina would be born out of that relationship. It was never in my intention to have that happen, but it did, and it was, I think, good for both of us.
Yeah, it's fortuitous, absolutely. And you know, I love Your Mama Don't Dance, and so like that's one of my favorite songs in the entire world. So, um, I'm glad that you guys got together, and I'm glad that you guys made the music that you did because the world is a better place because of it. So, all
Well,
right.
I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
Is it Trevor? Is that your first name?
Trevor, yes.
Yeah, Trevor. I've got to take another interview, but if you would like to pick up, and if you've not finished yet, I'll be glad to call you back and finish the stuff. But if you're good, I'm going to need to move on.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. I would literally just have like a couple more questions about like what you're doing now and stuff, but we can pick that up
Well,
later on.
well, you know what? Let's grab it real quick.
Okay.
I got a couple of minutes here.
So yeah, you've continued releasing music and staying creatively active. Are you currently working on any new material, and what inspires you to be creative? Later in your career like this.
Well, I've got a great band now, which I am just thrilled with. It's Jim Messina and the Roadrunners, and we released an album called Here, There, and Everywhere, which I'm not sure if you had an opportunity to hear it, but if you can download it, I think you'll love it.
Absolutely.
Or talk to Brandy, and I'll get you an upload so you can have it for free, whatever you need to do. But just let me know and I'll get it to you. But the band is just really hot, and this particular tour we're coming out with, I'm adding new music to it, songs that I'm sort of doing. I'm looking at the whole set as an evolutionary chronological history in my life. So I'm starting off with the set, what people would know, like Watching the River Run, House of the Corner, Danny's Song. But then I move into my solo stuff, like Mexican Minutes, which was actually recorded by Brooks and Dunn a number of years ago.
Yeah.
But I'm introducing Carefree Country Day from the Buffalo Springfield that I wrote for that band. I'm doing Kind Woman to both honor Richie Furay, but also, Rusty Young, who I was able to develop a great relationship even after Poco. We're adding Call It Love to the set, along with You Better Think Twice, which is also a Poco song. I'm bringing in, the country song in Holiday Hotel, which is Kenny and I's version of country rock, along with Your Mama Don't Dance, and a new song called She's Gotta Rock.
Nice.
And we take an intermission, and we come back, and I do Traveling Blues, and after that, we're putting in what I call an island medley, which consists of Coming to You from the Full Sail album, Lahaina, and of Ahivola from the Sittin' In album. Then I go to my solo works with New and Different Way, which is more Latin jazz, Loving You Every Minute.
Wow.
We go back to the trilogy, which is Loving Me to Make a Woman Wanted, and Peace of Mind. And then we've got Be Free in there, which people love. We end the set with Angry Eyes. And I've added a song that I did not write, but I loved as a kid listening to, which was a song by Tommy James and the Shondells, which is called Dragging the Line.
Mm-hmm.
And I do it real different than he did, and I was really concerned that he may be upset. So I contacted him, sent the music, and I said, listen, I don't want any credit for rewriting or anything. I've just arranged this differently. It's your melody, but I'm singing it up at third, and I've got some stuff that I've added to it. The lyrics are all the same, but if you don't like it, I'm happy to not do it. But he wrote me back and said, I love it. Do it. It sounds great. So
Good.
we've added that song, and then the last song we do, if we get another encore, is usually You Need a Man, which is a really it's a song, but it's got a jam in it, which is very Latin oriented, so Latin jazz oriented. So it's going to be a full evening whenever we perform, especially at Bethel Woods Center.
Mm-hmm.
But it'll be new music for those people who have heard me in the past with the Roadrunners. We've added some new material to it.
Excellent. Genre bending, Mr. Jim Messina.
Thank you.
I love it. Thank you so much for coming on this interview with me. I really appreciate you taking the time, and good luck with the rest of your interviews today.
All right, buddy. Thank you for your time and patience. I appreciate it.
Of course, my friend. I'll see you soon, all right? Good luck.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.